Hi everybody, this is Dan Stolbarger. Welcome to this week's KFIR Middle East Update. It's the week of September 24th. We are in the midst of Sukkot. So that's a 7-day feast in Israel. You probably know it as the Feast of Tabernacles. So many of the news agencies are closed during this period of time. So our report this week is a bit shorter. Reminder, make sure you grab the PDF PowerPoint. Always much more information on that than the time we have here for the YouTube. But let's just jump into our news bites. Remember the prison break. Israeli forces on Sunday caught the last 2 of the 6 Palestinian terrorists who had tunneled out of their maximum security jail up in the Galilee area nearly 2 weeks ago. As we mentioned, we knew they would be found. It was just a matter of time. The Washington Institute's Ron Satloff, in talking about Iran these days, makes it clear that Iran is less willing than ever to re-enter a deal and restrict its nuclear program despite the new administration's overtures. The bottom line is that this is a breakneck race to the finish line. Iran senses that they're close. They want a nuclear weapon. If we had a drum roll in the background, I can't imagine the musical score that would be going on here, because the bottom line is that Israel cannot let that happen. So there's a lot of noise, red lines. This will never happen. The U.S. saying we won't allow Iran a nuclear weapon. It's coming to a crescendo at this point in time. But don't expect anything that has any kind of teeth as far as a nuclear agreement with Iran. In Israel, or I guess you'd say amongst the Palestinians, nearly 80% of Palestinians want Mahmoud Abbas to resign. That's what the polls show. And in place of Abbas, the majority are leaning towards Hamas. Once again, the thought is that Abbas has been weak and he's never been in a worse position than he is today. And to replace the moderate Fatah with Hamas, it's pick your poison here. But Hamas, obviously on the terrorist list, much more in your face, out front, radically opposed to Israel than the soft-spoken Abbas and Fatah. Concerning news for us here in the States, the so-called squad, and you'll see photos of them in this presentation, kind of backed up by their woke Democratic allies, have prevented funding as it stands today for the Iron Dome system. Now keep in mind, this Iron Dome system is 100% on the defensive protective side. It's not an offensive weapon. And so they've been able to, in a sense, sidetrack or to stop, because there was a threat of closing down the government if they would remove the funding from Iron Dome. And they did that, which is a frightening thing that they'd have this much power. It appears there'll be a standalone vote coming up, and my guess is that it will be reinstated or whatever. But it is a concern for us that this so-called squad has enough power than they've just recently exhibited. Keep in mind that the Iron Dome system has been what's protecting Israeli civilians against the repeated missile attacks from Hezbollah and Hamas. Putin makes our news bites. President Vladimir Putin has made it very clear that Russia's policy towards the terrorist regimes, such as the Taliban, that his country needs to embrace and work with them. And he's encouraging other nations to unfreeze any kind of Afghanistan or Pakistani assets. So once again, the vacuum that's been created with the U.S. withdrawing looks as if it will be filled by Russia. We've talked about this in the past. Biblically speaking, prophetically speaking, we see a coalition that is moving in at this time to this vacuum that will be comprised of Russia, Iran, and Turkey. It is the Ezekiel 38-39 scenario happening right before our very eyes. Now, our report this week, as we look at the major articles that we're covering, Joe Biden just spoke at the United Nations. Biden addressed the UN on Tuesday, and his opening remarks is that the U.S. is now in the midst of declaring a new era of relentless diplomacy. He vowed that his administration is working to rebuild America's alliances that were, as he put it, severely strained during the Trump years. He promised to engage deeply with the rest of the world and work together with our partners towards a shared future. He went on to say that the biggest threat in the world today is not Islamic terrorism, but it's climate change. And as he's speaking in the UN, the truth is that Biden's words to the listener are ringing hollow. A growing number of Europeans and the Middle East leaders see Biden as weak, see the U.S. in retreat, and unable or unwilling to cooperate closely on critical issues of state. We've got problems now with France, with Germany, with the Saudis. These so-called, or these partners of us, are looking at our retreat and saying, this isn't the America that we expected. This is not, quote, America strong. I find it interesting because as we're looking at the Biden administration, I see something as flimsy as this administration in Israel as well, with this new so-called change government. As I mentioned, it is in the midst of Sukkot, an amazing feast, where Israelis are building sukkahs outside, spending the nights out there, remembering the faithfulness of God. The sukkahs, you need to make sure you see the stars, feel the wind. And it's a time of great rejoicing. Well, the Christian organization, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, has always sponsored a kind of a parade of nations, because we know that this particular feast is the one that in the millennium will be celebrated by the world. And so they have the Parade of Nations, and it's been a big deal. But because of COVID the last couple of years, it's all had to be done online, same as this year. And really the government has been a bit standoffish when it comes to, where does the Israeli government stand today with evangelicals? We know where Netanyahu stood. We know the relationship between Trump. And then we've got this, Naftali Bennett came to the White House, and it looks as if Biden is like snoring during this passionate plea of unity between the U.S. and Israel with Bennett. And it looks like Sleepy Joe's dozed off or whatever in the midst of it. And so I find it interesting that the need for this change government to glean a little bit more support. It's reaching out to evangelicals. And so this year's presentation from the ICEJ on Sukkot, senior Israeli leaders will be addressing the audiences online, including President Herzog, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Foreign Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid, and then we also have Defense Minister Benny Gantz, and on and on. It just seems like everybody's getting in saying, we love you, evangelicals, support us. Interesting times in which we're living. And then a couple more before we're done today. Ted Cruz, this whole Joe Biden's vaccine mandate. Cruz made news this week by stating that this mandate by Biden is nothing more than a distraction tactic from the disaster of Afghanistan. He appeared on Fox News on Sunday morning. He slams the Biden administration over what he calls the worst foreign policy catastrophe in a generation. And he said the vaccine mandate is going to be struck down in the court. They know that. They're counting on big business to do that. But bottom line is that it's just to shift the attention off of the embarrassment that the Biden administration is taking over Afghanistan. And then, not finally, a couple more. CNN in the news, big news there, right? Fareed Zakaria. This is one of the spokespersons or news personalities on CNN. I found it interesting that in a briefing that he compiles and sent out, he basically assesses the Abrahamic Accords as being a miserable failure. Go figure. And he goes on to say the problem in the Middle East today resides with Israel because of the assault that they've made on Hamas positions in Gaza. So the reason there's unrest and strife in the Middle East, according to Fareed, is because Israel retaliated against Gaza when they sent rockets into Israel. Had they not retaliated and done nothing, there wouldn't be any problems in the Middle East. This is the logic. This is the craziness of this position and the world we live in today. And then back to the squad. I've just given you a couple pictures of the squad that's freezing funding for the defensive Iron Dome to protect Israelis, citizens. And then we have just the classic picture, slide 9. I'm sure you want to print this up, of AOC at the Met Gala, sporting her new dress, which is written on the back in huge red letters, white dress, huge red letters, tax the rich. That's the squad for you. That's the new woke administration that has much more power than what we're realizing in this day. As the Chinese proverb goes, these are interesting times in which we're living. And I'm not sure I want to live in interesting times, but that's what's going on in the world today. That's our report from the Middle East, our Middle East update. With that, God bless you. Shalom. Remember the importance of prayer. Remember the mandate given us in Scripture to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And with that, shalom.